A court of appeals has ruled that a former assistant principal in Douglas County can proceed with a bias lawsuit over his firing in 2020. He was fired after school administrators allegedly cited religious comments that he made about a school production of the Laramie Project. That's a play about the aftermath of the 1998 murder of Matthew Shepard, a gay college student at the University of Wyoming. A judge dismissed the lawsuit last year, but this week an appeals court ruled there is some evidence to allow part of the suit to advance. That lawsuit will now go before another judge to determine if it will in fact go to trial. So joining us this morning to talk a little bit more about this case is 9 News legal expert Whitney Traylor. Whitney, good morning.
Good morning.
Before we dive too deep into this, what were the religious comments that were made in this case?
Yeah, so when the play was going to start, the theater director sent a message to all of the staff and everyone saying that, hey, this is for mature audiences only. It should be high school and above, and kind of talked about the context of the play. And in response, he said, hey, I'd love to collaborate. And one of the specific comments is, the love that Jesus can provide will help the play. And so it was those religious comments that essentially led to his being put on leave, an investigation, and ultimately his termination.
Okay, I asked that for everybody's context at home. Now, this case was dismissed originally, but as we just talked about, an appeals court says that part of it can move forward.
Right, so at the trial court level, and this was a 12B6 motion, so it was early on. So the complaint was filed, and then the school filed this motion. So there was no evidence, there was no trial, no hearings, anything like that. And he had asserted 3 claims. So there were 2 retaliation claims. One was based on a First Amendment, and the other was based on federal law. And then he had a traditional discrimination under Title VII. All of those were dismissed. And so on appeal, though, the Court of Appeals said, yeah, we agree with you that the retaliation is not there, but there is enough to show that his termination was based on his religion, and so he can move forward on that. But it's very early in the case. That was the initial motion filed by the school.
I want to ask for this case and for others similar to it, what laws protect Coloradans from religious discrimination?
Right, so there's a number of laws. Title VII is one in particular. So, and it depends if you're a private employer or a public employer, because as a public employee, if you work for the government, then you have additional constitutional protections, specifically the First Amendment protection of you have a right to exercise your religion. And so here, that was one of his arguments. That one got dismissed and the Court of Appeals agreed with it. But for everybody else, as a private employer, there's Title VII, which is a federal statute that says you can't be discriminated based on your religion. And then there's the Colorado law, the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, which kind of mirrors that. So really there is protection that you can't be discriminated against based on your religion. And they have to do, an employer has to accommodate your religion as long as it doesn't create an undue hardship. So your Sabbath, things like that. So, and that's kind of a balancing act, because if it's, a busy season for the employer and you're saying I need a day off from my Sabbath, they may not have to accommodate that because it would be an undue hardship.
So what evidence is going to come into play for this case?
Right, so that's what will happen now is the case will move forward and there'll be some discovery and they'll get into the evidence, and some of the things that they'll look at, and this is what was alleged in the complaint, is that he was a Christian, he was qualified, he had good reviews, he sent this email, and they cited the religious comments, which led to the investigation, led to his termination. So they'll look at his history, how they treated non-Christians, because a big part of religious discrimination is, are you being treated less favorably than essentially non-Christians in this case, because that's the claim.
And now that the Court of Appeals has ruled on this, what happens next?
Right, so now the case will go forward and they'll get into discovery, so they'll take depositions, they'll do interrogatories, and so they'll start to frame the case. There will be other motions for sure to try and dismiss this case as it goes forward, and if they're successful, then the case will be dismissed and there could be another appeal, and that can happen in the same case. You have an appeal early on and then you have an appeal later in the case. If none of those things are successful and the case goes to trial, the wheels of justice move slowly, so it could be a year or two before they get to trial. Now, the majority of cases, I can't speak to this one, but over 90% of cases settle for a lot of reasons. It's expensive, you're going to a jury, you don't know how they're going to rule. So I would suspect if this case goes forward that it will settle, but if not, you could look at a trial in a year or two.
Well, regardless of the developments, if we do get those for everybody at home, we'll make sure that we bring those to you.
Yep.
Whitney, thank you for helping us understand this case a little bit better. We appreciate it.